Okay, this is the final section of Chapter 15 and of the entire Civil War unit. We are in Reconstruction of the North. Your objective for this section is to be able to describe the overall changes that the era of Reconstruction wrought in the United States. And so it's not just the North. We're going to look back at Section 2 as well. And so the whole goal is you can see what Reconstruction did across the U.S. Okay, so let's begin with the Grant administration. Remember, Grant was the commander of the Union forces during the Civil War, was the best general that the Union had after a series of less than effective military commanders. And Grant's campaign motto is going to be, "Let us have peace." Okay, everyone's kind of tired of the fighting within Congress and within the government. Obviously, everyone wants to get back to a time of peace after following the Civil War. But Grant will be pretty much a radical president in the sense that he is going to be very passive, and he's not going to believe that the president should kind of shape Reconstruction the way that Johnson did. He feels like Congress should pretty much run the nation. And what happens is, and Grant pretty much gets elected because he's known as a very honest guy, and he is, but he has a lack of political experience. He's a military guy, so he's not really good at all of this, diplomacy, politics kind of a thing. And his administration actually becomes one of the most corrupt, and it becomes synonymous, corruption becomes synonymous with this term Grantism. Even though he's one of the most honest, the people that are surrounding him and the events that happen during his administration are just full of corruption. So he becomes known as one of the worst presidents in our history. Okay, so these are some of the scandals that take place during Grant's time as president. The first scandal is the Credit Mobilier scandal, and this is a scandal that involves a railroad construction company who was padding expenses. Pretty much they were saying things cost more than they actually did, and then they would take the excess of that amount and they would pay that to their stockholders. They sold stock to congressmen and government officials way below the market prices, kind of like a bribe. Then you have Fisk and Gould. When we get into the Gilded Age, we'll talk about Fisk and Gould again, and how they kind of try to swindle Vanderbilt. But right now, what they're trying to do, these guys are kind of, they're schemers. They're kind of tricky. They try to gain control of the gold market. So pretty much what they wanted to do was to buy up all this gold and then start selling it without the federal government releasing its gold stores, which would drop the price of gold. And so in order to do that, they bribed Grant's brother-in-law to help ensure government cooperation with that plan. And so this all goes down on this day called Black Friday when they start to sell it. Grant finds out what they're doing and does release the gold stores, so it's kind of, the plan is only partially successful. But these guys famously say there was nothing lost because they still profit from it. There's nothing lost save honor. They kind of laugh it off, like no big deal. And again, I told you, you'll see these guys in the next chapter with another scheme to kind of, pretty much to get Vanderbilt to spend a lot of money without gaining what he wants. Okay, moving on. Belknap was Grant's Secretary of War. He's accused of receiving bribes. So he would receive bribes, and then in return for those bribes, he would grant special licenses to the people that were paying him the bribes so that they could sell goods to Native Americans. So you needed a special license in order to sell things to the Native American communities. And so he would give those licenses to people in return for bribes. Then we have the whiskey ring scandal, and Belknap will actually resign from office because of these accusations. We have the whiskey ring scandal, whiskey distillers and tax collectors. So together, whiskey distillers were supposed to pay an excise tax for the whiskey, and the tax collectors, they kind of get together and they pretty much conspire to cheat the government out of this tax money. They end up not paying it, And here's a little political cartoon. You can't really see it very clearly on the screen, but it's just illustrating the whiskey ring scandal. Okay. Then we have Tammany Hall, which is a really important one that I want you guys to remember, especially if you have any plans to take AP US History, or even government. This is kind of an important, I don't want to say scandal, but yeah, scandal, place of corruption in our history that you're going to want to remember. So Tammany Hall is pretty much where the city government of New York is happening, and it's under the direction of William Boss Tweed, and we'll just call him Boss Tweed from here on out. And here's a cartoon you see of Boss Tweed. Pretty much what they were taking, or what they were doing, was they were taking all the city funds and they were putting it into their own pockets and increasing the city debt. There was fake mental hospitals, fake schools, fake you name it on the books that money was supposed to be going to, and it was just going to pay Tweed and kind of his entourage off instead of going towards an actual hospital. They also, kind of like the credit mobilier scandal, they would say, we're building this, school and it's going to cost us $10 million, but in reality it's only costing $3 million, and they're taking the rest of that money and paying it to themselves. Also, pretty much, Tweed, he's a Democrat. This is allowed to go on for so long because he helps other Democratic politicians get elected, because he pretty much ensures that they're getting the votes in this area. And when we talk about immigration later on, or if you do take AP US History, we'll talk about immigration. These city governments, even though they're corrupt, they're much better at serving the needs of the immigrant communities, especially in places like New York, than the actual federal government will be. And most of that is, too, they're trying to get these votes from the immigrants. And so, anyway, let's move on. Tweed's eventual arrest happens because of the cartoonist Thomas Nast. Thomas Nast kind of goes over after Tweed, and he has many political cartoons that feature Tweed. Thomas Nast is like a great reformer. And what happens is Tweed actually flees to Spain, and they catch him in Spain because they recognize him based off of some of these cartoons. And it's kind of funny because they arrest him for kidnapping because there's a cartoon of him pulling the collars of two little boys, and that's what the Spanish police thought that he was wanted for. Okay, so we get this new party, okay, or part of a party, right, splits off, the Liberal Republicans, that are going to oppose Grant's re-election. They want to see the end of military occupation of the South, and they want to end the corruption of the national government. And they have a really hard time finding a nominee, because you have not just the liberal Republicans, but they kind of team up with the Southern Democrats who want to see the end of military occupation. So they all kind of team up, but it's hard because they don't really, besides wanting, the end of Grant's administration and the end of military occupation, they don't really agree on a lot of things. So it's very difficult for them to find a candidate. They finally decide to nominate this newspaper editor, Horace Greeley. Horace Greeley is kind of a really strange guy. He's an advocate for things like vegetarianism, which is very strange at this time. You don't really hear about people being vegetarians. And spiritualism, meaning he wants to communicate with the dead. So seances and stuff. So he's pretty eccentric presidential candidate. Grant crushes him, beats him very soundly, and Greeley, from pretty much the exhaustion of the election, dies 3 weeks later. Okay. So the economy is pretty much prospering at the time that Grant wins the election. But then you have the Panic of 1873, which sets off a 6-year depression. And a part of the reason why there's this depression is you have this money, greenbacks, or known as greenbacks. It was issued during the war, and that money's not backed by gold or silver. Pretty much it's backed by the promise of the government to honor it. And so you have people arguing over well, should we just get rid of the greenbacks? No, we want greenbacks. We want more greenbacks because that will increase the circulation of money, and we'll have more of it, but not necessarily recognizing that if they have more of it, prices will go up, and that's not necessarily a good thing. And so they kind of just come to this compromise, and the government actually does issue more greenbacks, and they also promise that they will redeem the greenbacks at with their value in gold. So that's where you get this little quote, "as good as gold." But all of this makes the Depression worse. It doesn't really fix it. Okay. Election of 1876. So again, you've seen all of this corruption happen under Grant. We have economic hard times because of that panic. We have the Republicans nominating dark horse Rutherford B. Hayes. Remember what a dark horse is? He's kind of like this candidate that kind of comes out of nowhere. No one really knows him that well. It's not to say that, like, he's a complete no one. He has, you know, been known in politics, but he's just not, he's kind of the underdog. He's not the candidate that you probably would have thought of right away. And then the Democrats nominate Samuel J. Tilden. The Republicans will use this kind of technique called waving the bloody shirt during their campaign. They'll blame the Democrats for the Civil War because it's the Democrats that seceded from the Union. It's a Democrat that shot Abraham Lincoln, and they'll just keep saying things like that. Like, it's all their fault, all of these people died, you can't vote Democrat. And they treat the Democrats like traitors. Like, they're still the enemy. How could you vote for a Democrat? You can't do that. This is your bonus question. If you don't know what university is represented by this symbol, you can go ahead and Google image search it. Okay. So the election is a disputed election, kind of like, most of you probably won't remember the Bush and Gore election. But this election looks like Tilden won. We have 3 states with conflicting returns. All of these states are occupied by the military, so there's a committee that's kind of chosen and put together to look at all of these disputed votes, and what happens is they decide to give these votes to Hayes, and that makes Hayes the president. And this leads us to the Compromise of 1877. You have Democrats that are threatening to hold up the official counting of the electoral votes indefinitely, so we won't declare who's president. So Republicans and Democrats meet because we have to choose a president. This can't go on. And they decide on a compromise. So if the Republicans get Hayes as president, they promise to remove all of the troops from the South. And that's what happens, and Reconstruction is over. So now you have Hayes as president and no more military occupation of the South. Okay, this is the little bit that's on section 4 because it's only about a page and a half. So we want to just look at what were the far-reaching results of Reconstruction. Well, one, you have the slaves are freed. The economy of the South is devastated, and it has to try to rebuild, and we've looked at things like sharecropping that kind of replaces that slavery system, but the South doesn't really turn away from its agricultural roots. It doesn't start to pursue industry as much as could have been hoped, but the freeing of the slaves is major. The South votes solidly Democratic until 1972. A Republican candidate will not carry the South until 1972. So that's almost 100 years of the South voting Democratic, and that gives them that nickname, Solid South. The power of the federal government is expanded through Reconstruction, and we'll see this again when we get to the Great Depression. You'll see the federal government's powers expand even more. Their influence will be even more far-reaching into the lives of the citizens of the United States and over state governments. So now you kind of see this is less of a union of states, how like before the Civil War people thought of it as we all join together of our own free will and we can decide to leave, and it's this kind of agreement between states. Now it's not so much that as it is an entire nation. It's not so much like we're the state of Nevada, like, yay, Nevada, we agree to be part of the United States. It's more like we are the United States, we are Americans. Okay, this is your paragraph shrink, corruption, compromise, politics. SRQ check. List at least 3 major scandals of the Grant administration. Any 3 of these will work. The credit mobilier scandal, the Fisk gold scheme, the bribery of Secretary of War William Belknap, or the whiskey ring. Who was the leader of the corrupt city government of New York during the Reconstruction era? What was his political party? It's Boss Tweed, and he was a Democrat. What were the three main campaign themes of the Democrats in 1876? The abuses of Southern Reconstruction, Republican corruption, economic hard times. What did the Southern Democrats promise in the Compromise of 1877? What did the Republicans promise? The Southern Democrats promised to allow the electoral votes to be counted so that Hayes could become president, and the Republicans promised to withdraw the last remaining federal troops from the South, ending military occupation and Reconstruction. What was the effect of the Civil War and Reconstruction on Southern voting as a whole region? Okay, pretty much we get that solid South term. The South will vote Democratic until the early 1970s.